Let's start our business. The idea is I want to throw out a few ideas to start a bit of discussion, a bit theory, throwing out a few ideas, and then get some feedback, see if you have questions, comments. It has to be a bit interactive. So if you have something to say, something bothering you, something not clear, you just say it, and then we can start the workshop aspect. Okay, so I wanted to actually share a few reflections that I had over the last period on this art of questioning, since I just learned it's the official subject of our seminar, which is about the question of truth. Yes. Now, truth today is not always a very popular concept, either because some people claim that nobody knows what it is, and therefore we can't do anything with it, it's useless, or even some philosophers like Rorty and pragmatist tradition are claiming very philosophical fashion that it's either inappropriate or useless concept. But I tend to think that in the work of questioning, it is a very useful concept. Now, call it truth or call it something else, personally I don't care, because sometimes what actually we see, it's called redescription. Would you mind turning on the light? Do you remember what the light is over there, Doc? Remember? Turn it on. Please maybe for the camera. No, the one in the back there, remember?
Oh,
yeah. And the other one too, yes. Yes, I think of this idea of redescription, which is you see Rorty how to use the idea that the way you define things, the way you call something gives it the reality. So some reality or some phenomenon, some process, the way you call it is going to make a difference. So that might be true, but I think there are different ways to call truth truth. But I won't go through that. If someone later on wants to call it something else, it doesn't bother me. We'll just do is look what it is, what it does, how we can use it. Because in the art of questioning, it's a practice, right? In fact, I think what gathers together is the idea of philosophy as a practice. It is not so much to draw some kind of vision of the world or some kind of dogma. In fact, probably people here have different visions of the world. But what should be the subject of discussion is more operating postulates, right? Define some kind of postulates that allow work to be done. So in a way, it's a rather pragmatic concept, although it's practice-oriented. In other words, what kind of postulate, what kind of hypothesis allow us to do the work? So if somebody wants to go truth in a different way, we can examine this, see what it does the same thing or not do the same thing. Yes. But truth, if you can make a link here for me at least, it has very much to do with being conscious. Being conscious. In other words, be conscious is to see the truth of something. And if you're not conscious, you don't see the truth, you see something else. Call it illusion, call it lie, call it mistake, call it whatever you want. But the truth has something to do with being conscious, with knowing what is taking place. Something has to do with reality, with coherency, with adequation, with different kind of things, doesn't matter. So I call it truth, to make it simple, because in general, within common language, common reason, we often call this truth, right? If I say now I'm standing up, we will say this is not true. Truth is, they will say the fact I'm sitting down. Truth is the fact I'm speaking. Now, of course, you can problematize this, say that I'm not really speaking, I'm not really sitting down, but to make it quick, as a quick statement, we can say I'm sitting down and I'm speaking. So the concept of truth is interesting, I think, and I think of this Greek concept aletheia, the veil, unveiling. And somehow the philosophical questioning has to do with truth because it has to do with unveiling, with ripping the veil, taking away the veil, right? You know, this aletheia concept. And at the same time, I take the opportunity to throw in a little polemical aspect to this. Unveiling is a violent act. Unveiling, in general, often we don't want to take away the veil, because behind the veil is nudity. Behind the veil is something, of course, nudity here is a metaphorical sense, but as well it can be real. When we veil something, it's because something stops us from showing this thing. Call it, I don't know, in English, it's pewter, when you don't want to show your nakedness. What do you call it? Pewter, yeah.
No.
Pewter, yeah.
No,
okay. Yeah, no.
Prudent.
English. You know, I don't want to show you. You know what Adam and Eve learned when they left the Garden of Eden? They took a leaf to hide their sexual parts. What do you call that in English?
Prudent.
No, not
prudent.
No. Pewter. You don't want to show your sex, and then you show what is.
Modesty.
No, pudeur.
Close, yes.
Pudeur. Yeah, it's pudeur is modesty. Is modesty
equivalent?
But your dictionary is very small. I think there's a problem calling it modesty.
There's another one.
Modesty has nothing to do with not showing your nakedness.
Yes,
it's natural.
Yes, it may have. Yes.
Okay, so let's ignore that now. Maybe it's modesty. Maybe okay. So anyway, it's something where you don't want to show. And modesty can be a quality, and in the sense that they learn growing up, Adam and Eve, or learning knowledge, that you don't show everything. So in a way, not showing is something that can be legitimate. Sometimes, I don't know, you have this experience when you go on these beaches where everybody shows sort of, you can call everything or almost everything. You wish sometimes that some people would hide some things, yes, just for aesthetic reasons, they might feel very good. But when you see all this flesh, I don't know about you, but when you see all this flesh on the beach, you feel like in a huge butcher shop, and you say, oh my God, I'm glad that Adam and Eve invented the leaf, hide parts, and I'm glad we have clothes, because clothes are useful to give some other shape to. In other words, what is natural is not necessarily good. It's not necessarily aesthetic. It's not necessarily whatever. And so veiling can have its reason to be. Can be legitimate in that. So truth has something a bit violent because truth has to do with nakedness, and in fact, indeed, truth is both violent and can be appropriate or inappropriate, which has nothing for me being violent, because it can be violent and appropriate, and it can be violent and inappropriate. Yes, and that's why the art of questioning is not simply the art of saying, okay, let's unveil, but as well has to be the art of unveiling, maybe not in an appropriate way. For example, if somebody, I don't know, is very sick, and you think telling him, a typical doctor dilemma, somebody's very sick, and for him to know that he's very sick is either the person could not take it, or even might be bad because you want his spirits to go up, so he feels better for psychological or medical reasons. So it has to know if it's appropriate or not. And sometimes truth is appropriate, sometimes it's not. If we think the person he's speaking to is very ugly, and maybe we don't want to tell this person, maybe it's appropriate, and maybe it's not. But anyway, so there's two problems with truth, the question of violence. When somebody doesn't want to know truth, for example, to impose truth is violent. But the question is it appropriate or not? Because sometimes you say somebody doesn't want to know truth, or yourself you don't want to know truth. In fact, in French, you have an expression which is to make yourself violent. Does it sound in English? Okay? So faire violence, we say. You make violence to yourself. In other words, your own want, you say, okay, for example, I don't want to do this. I'm going to make violence to myself. And French we used to do it because I think I have to do it. Yes? in which you like, go to force yourself, you would say. But in French, we even a more dramatic thing, to make violence to yourself. So this idea of truth. So these are the kind of dilemma. I think that's why, in a way, it's an art. Because an art has a lot to do with proportions, with making decisions, with making strategic and tactical decisions. And since if questioning has to do with is an art, ars philosophica, then you have to make certain decisions and determine if they're appropriate or not, if something is true or not, if this truth is appropriate or not. And of course, even when somebody, for example, in the work of philosophical consultation, somebody comes to see you, you have actually a strange phenomenon, because somebody comes to you with a question. So, if they have this question, one can imagine they want to know some answer to that question, but that's in a way too simple. Because we want to know the answer, but sometimes the answer is rather obvious even to the person himself. But actually what they want is an answer which is not that answer. Right? In other words, they know the truth of their question. The answer is like right, in front of their eyes, like the stolen letter, principle of Edgar Allan Poe. What is the letter? It's right there. The police goes looking for this stolen letter under the floor in very strange places. But Dupin, he knows that the guy's very smart. Where is it? Right in front, on the chimney. There's a stolen letter. Yeah? And often that's what it is. People come to see you who are not part of the dilemma of this person, who are not caught within his own turmoil. You look at this person, you see, it's obvious, right? But this obviousness, in a way, is not obvious. It's for the person, isn't obvious. Now, if you're only concerned with telling him what you think, then in 2 minutes, you just say it. But if you want to practice the art of questioning, where you want to get the person to see something right in front and he doesn't want to see, then you have to undergo a whole process to see what is going on there, to undo the resistance, undo the knots, undo all the series of fig leaves, right? And one way I qualify this is to invite someone to reconciliate himself with his own speech. Yes, the reconciliation word. Because often, or most times, it's in the speech, it's contained there. Like you hear a question is contained. Or you even hear statements people make, and it's contained in the speech, in the words. The truth. It's an idea of Pascal. So there's truth in their opinion. But sort of, I don't know say in English, but they don't know where it is, or they don't know to what extent it's there. So you have to get people to hear their own speech and see within their own speech. But there's something very strange. Man is a being of image. One definition, there's been many definitions of what man is. If he's an animal, is he a building animal? Is he a metaphysical animal? Is he a social animal? I like this idea that man is a lying animal. If you have animals, they don't lie very much, or hardly ever, or not at all, right? I don't know if your dog ever lied to you, or if the bird in the field ever lied to you, or if the spider lies to you. Okay, can somebody, Josh, please, because that might be for practical reasons. Can you take this and sort of répondre mais ouvre-le déjà. And it's a lying animal because man invents a reality, yes, which is both his quality, it's both his qualities, creative, he makes houses, rockets, whatever you want. But at the same time, creating reality is a way to avoid reality. Since reality has a rather dialectical function, right? Which is then poses another problem, which is the relationship between truth and reality, but we come back to that. But there's something that is objective within the human speech, you know, when somebody uses a word. And that's a phenomenon you see more or less strongly in different cultures, but something where people, you say, what does this word mean? And the person will say, well, for me, this word means. And that's always a very interesting thing. Because what does it mean? For me, this word means. Words are supposed to be something that belongs to a common language. And you're supposed to be able to open a dictionary and say, this word means that. Now, sometimes words have meanings, 2, 3, 4, 5 different meanings. But when you listen sometimes, for me, this word means that. Very strange, because then I ask people, if you go in the street and give that meaning to this word, will people say, yes, I know that meaning, or this is a very strange meaning? Yes, you know? Now, it does not imply that it's forbidden to create your own lexicon, like your own language. Ça va? Oui? C'est pas urgent?
No.
Okay. So, it's not forbidden. Poets do this, create their own language. Philosophers do this, create their own language. Children, or people, yes. And in fact, what was the story about this island? People off the line, they made their own language. After a while, you know, why not? It makes a lot of sense. Names are created. The problem is then when we try to deny any objective quality to language, to words we use when we speak to people, and we just pretend to have a totally subjective thing. Because then what happens is like saying, well, the world for me is a peanut. Or to say, the table for me is, I don't know, something to sleep on. Of course, maybe I can sleep. Bigger table, I can sleep on it. But by doing this, I'm not seeing anymore that there's a dimension within my own speech that escapes me. Because I did use a word I did not invent. If I use the word table, I did not make that word. So that word I took from something, from someplace, from some people. And it has its own reality. And I cannot pretend, say, okay, for me table is. Now if I say already, schlubble is blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's already different. But table, I have the right to say table is a thing to sleep on. But if I ignore totally the word table, where it comes from, who uses it, how do we use it, what is the common meaning of the word table, then I think there's something of a lie. You know, because I ignore something that is part of the reality of that word. Now, let me give a counterexample. It's a very common academic thing to say, the reality of the word is the etymology. You see, that word, yes, but etymologically means that. And that is the reality of the word. That as well doesn't make sense, because I don't know why the embryo will be more real than the old human being. I don't see any reason, you know. Now, of course, the origin, the birth, has some reality to it, and why not? And that's interesting. But it is not the reality because the words are changed, you know, and therefore, and that's there's an example we have in interesting features in French, for example. There's a word trop. Trop means too much, but because there's an American thing, it's too much means it's good. Trop means, instead of being too much, means very. You know, instead of being an excess, it's just a superlative. So the kids do this a lot. So it's very interesting. What do you do in front of that? Do you say, okay, this is not the right meaning, it means too much and not very, or do you accept the common use? That's the sort of, you know. Now, in a way, the position I like to have is says, well, you can use it in a certain way if you want, but you have to be conscious that that word as well has another history, has another meaning. Because otherwise that other meaning of excess disappears. And too much does not exist anymore as too much. Excess disappeared. And there's only a superlative there. Right? So it's a bit the same thing. If you want to make your own lexicon, if you want to say table is a thing to sleep, there's no problem with it. Why not? After all, you know, you're living in a democracy and you can be a poet if you want. But if you're not conscious that table has a history, has a common meaning, then I think there's something of the order of the lying. I could call it ignorance, but it's not ignorance. Because when you say for me table means bed, you sort of know that table is, for most people, a thing to put dishes on or something like this. If you say you don't know and the word is very rare, then this can be understood. Maybe you can call it ignorance. But if it's rather common, and I'm saying this because that is a typical way by which people escape their own truth. They use words. Then when you question them on those words, they say, oh yes, but this word, for example, say this is my enemy. Oh yes, is that your enemy? Yeah, but for me, enemy is something I have good discussions with. Well, you can say this if you want. But is enemy in general somebody you have good discussions with? It does not exclude it. You can have a good discussion with your enemy if you want. But is enemy? And I say this because often the denial of words has a lot to do with what you can call negative words. Words that bear negative connotation. Although negative, what is negative for one is not always what is negative for the other. So it's interesting because if you perceive this, you can start seeing what is negative for someone through this. What did they deny? And what is negative? And then you can use this to get their axiology. To get their axiology. Axiology is the hierarchy of values for someone. Yes. So when you know what is negative for them, then you know, by a sort of contradictory principle, what can be positive for them. Yes, for example, friends is good, enemy is bad. Then I know, how you have your value system established, right? So it's called axiology. Okay.
How do you write it?
Axiology, A-X-I-O-L. Axiology. Axis, like the logic of axis. It gives an axis of value, And that's by the way, in generally, when you want to do a philosophical consultation, you question someone, that's what you're trying to establish for the person. Because the person has a question. But that question you don't want to answer, you don't want an answer that corresponds to a question to my axiology, because it wouldn't make sense. So I have to get this person to get a sense of their own axiology, so you can answer that question or deal with that question within the context of their own axiology. But in general, when somebody doesn't want or cannot answer a question, that's because either they're not clear on their own axiology, or because they don't want to know their own axiology. Yes, that's a very typical thing. Yes, and even if you see it, you want the person to see it. Yes, and because first of all, you see it, you might make mistakes, but as well, even if it's correctly, the unveiling is a crucial